Thank you all so much for coming here on this lovely Sunday afternoon. And yes, you did steal my line, because we do have to congratulate you, Jesse, on this big deal for the film. Is it now like relaxing to be at the festival at this point?
Yeah. It's relaxing. Yeah, I mean, I wanted like something much more lower. So yeah, like my hopes were so far worse. So yeah, it's relaxing and shocking, and I feel like giving everybody in this room some of that $10 million prize.
Well, you gave us something special already in A Real Pain. It is a film that very much, obviously it is a very personal film to you, but if I think, the standing ovation and the reaction of the film says something, is that it's a film that people have already felt resonates with them. What has it been like to have those kind of early conversations with folks about what they're picking up from this story?
Oh, thanks. Yeah. I appreciate that question. Yeah, as you mentioned, the movie is very, personal, up to the, locations where we shot, which, used to be where my family lived in, 1939. And so the movie is very personal, oftentimes autobiographical. And yet my hope with the movie, which I was feeling here, and that was my main hope and concern, was that it kind of transcends the kind of niche world that I'm speaking about. My specific culture, my specific generation, my specific geographical ancestry. And so my hope is that like the movie can transcend that and speak to, the wider feeling of being curious about your past, trying to reconcile your own life with your family's trauma, and seeing how that kind of trauma, that global trauma, can get passed down into modern life and still, have a kind of really horrible ripple effect.
It does. I mean, we were just chatting a little bit backstage. Chiwetel, it's a very similar situation with Rob Peace as well, where this is one man's story, but it's one man's story that is many men's stories. So tell me a little bit about that idea as well. Folks will be seeing your film tomorrow, sure. But that feeling of what you wanted folks to see in the project.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that it's about this idea of empathy and of generating empathy and generating understanding that in areas that have sort of, I don't know, for some reason felt very dismissed. Rob's journey is this incredibly complex journey that he goes through. These systems that he's sort of dealing with and fighting against in many ways. These intersections of his relationship to the criminal justice system, to housing, to education. These things that eventually sort of conspire to kind of destroy him, actually. And that journey, I think, is something that has been typically sort of patronized in some ways, that people aren't as empathetic as they could be to the struggles that people are facing to marry all of these different aspects of their lives together, and the responsibilities that they're taking on, and the pressures that are taking on, and the pressures that are put upon them. And so I think that there's something that's obviously very specific to Rob and to Rob and his community and his family and the richness of all of those things. But actually, as Jesse says, I think there's something that is very relatable in a much wider context, and that's really what I think that's really what spoke to me about the film, about the story.
There's an empathy through line too. It feels like in A Real Pain as well. I mean, it's a story of these two cousins and the ways in which we kind of grapple with each other and ourselves and how we feel for people, sometimes even more than we feel for ourselves. Tell me a little bit about developing the relationship that we see on the screen between David and Benji.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, my background is in playwriting, and I've written this dynamic in one successful and one unsuccessful play, and written these two characters separately in separate plays, also one and one. And then I wrote like a short story about them traveling to Mongolia and becoming disillusioned with their friend who had moved there and commercialized this mountain. And then and so I loved writing this dynamic so much and have written about it in different ways. And then I saw an ad on the internet while I was trying to adapt the Mongolia story forgive me for being slightly crass here, but it was so strange to me that it stuck out in my mind. There was an advertisement for Auschwitz tours with lunch. And I remember just thinking, like, that is the most incredible 4 words I've ever read that explains modernity, that explains, like, my family's history to being, middle-class American professionals, how embarrassing that is that we want that lunch, and so I was like, I scrapped Mongolia, and I said, this is what it is. There's no other way to tell a story about kind of like generational pain than like to put these 2 guys who have this kind of funny modern relationship, against the backdrop of those sets, and have it speak for itself. It allowed me to basically not have to explain any of the themes in any didactic way because you just put these 2 guys in Poland in these concentration camp sets and all these places that they visit, and it tells this wider story that I couldn't possibly do with language.
I will say it does make me wonder about the other touring company that doesn't offer lunch. That seems...
That to me seems like the right way to do it. Like, yeah, eat when you're home.
When I was watching the film, I was struck by, first, obviously, the dynamic on screen between yourself and Kieran. But I also was interested in the idea of all of the people that they're surrounded with on this tour, and the fact that they are also all so richly painted as well. I mean, for both of you, you both are multi-hyphenate filmmakers, of course, incredible actors, and I'm always curious about how that informs the way in which you create a story and create a world and create obviously the protagonist is always hugely important, but making sure that the other characters are also as rich. So I was just curious about that concept. You get Jennifer Grey in, and I'm just in awe of the fact that she's in the film, but then also, heartbroken for her about her divorce and all of these things. There's just all these tiny little details that are just beautiful.
Well, the conversation that Chiwetel and I had backstage was just about, basically me just peppering him about every single actor in his movie, because they are person for person phenomenal. And it's so funny that you bring this question up, and we're both actors, and it just occurred to me that probably that's the thing we care most about, right? I want to make sure every actor on the set feels like they have something to do.
Yeah, that they have a voice and that they that they have a story to tell as a character. I think so, because we've all been in those circumstances when you're sort of unsure what you're doing, and there's a lack of clarity, and maybe there's a lack of clarity in the script, and it's a symphony. You want to try and make sure that everybody has a journey to go on in the story that really sits in and sings with the overall piece and the overall theme and the overall nature of what you're trying to tell. I thought that was completely, actually to your point, I thought that was completely beautiful in A Real Pain. I just thought that whole group had so much to offer, and you could find yourself empathizing with different characters at different points. And that's definitely what we were going for in Rob Peace, this story of a complex group of people.
I'm curious, you mentioned the symphony aspect of it. Where did you begin with the conducting? What did that look like for you in creating the symphony of making a film?
Well, I mean, I had the benefit of this phenomenal book, written by Jeff Hobbs. So there was an incredible starting place to look at this story, and it also presented this idea of empathy because, for those of you who don't know, Jeff Hobbs was Rob Peace's roommate at Yale. So this idea of somebody really trying to see across the divides, see across the differences in their lives, to really understand his friend, to go behind the curtain and really work out what was going on, was the first step for me. It sort of leads, it's the Hansel and Gretel, it's the first breadcrumbs to what is this story really trying to do? It's trying to open up this idea of how we look at the people around us, how we engage with the struggles that people are going through, and what we can do better. And that's, that was what I was so moved by with what Jeff had done in the book, that it really was a kind of it was a way of starting that conversation, a way of saying, how can I be better? How can I be a better ally? Even in death, even in somebody's death, how could I be a better ally to that person and their family? So that was the first step for me, was just following that journey.
And then where do you go from there? I mean, in adapting the book, and then of course, we were actually setting up the locations. You went to Yale. What is your process when you work on something like this?
Well, I think you just need to sort of get as underneath it as possible, and then you bring in, all of these elements of your own experience. One of the things that I think was meaningful to me was that I recognized so much of what Rob went through. I just understood it. Some of it intuitively, some of it experientially, but I just got a part of his journey. And I think it's then you're sort of digging into the specifics, and even the specifics then become universal. I mean, it's well mentioned, but speaking to Jackie P, speaking to the family, going to Yale, understanding what the professors had to say, understanding what the community in general has to say, and what people feel about this story, in a kind of broad context, and what its meaning is for people. And to find and discover how rich a meaning it has, how lasting a legacy it has, how people absolutely recognize that we want Rob here, we want him here, we want him with us. He shouldn't have passed away, and there were reasons that happened to him, and there were choices and decisions and systems that are in place that led those things, to the result that it had. And these things can be changed if they're focused on, if we concentrate as a community. And that's where I think filmmaking has a real voice. It has really something to say in a context like this, because it's not obvious sometimes. It's not easy because often, our relationship to media and so on, and the way things are portrayed and the biases that are put on it, distract us from what's really happening. This is a real life, a real journey, and real choices that are made for incredibly important reasons in Rob's experience. And so, for me, that's what was. That's the journey to go on, I think, as a filmmaker. That's what kind of gets you moving. It's like, well, what does this have to say? And I think it has something profound to say.
What did you most want to know from Jackie? What was important to you when you first sat down with her to discuss her son?
Well, I think from Jackie, the critical thing for me was, and the question that I asked her was, what do you not want to see? What do you not want to see? When it comes down to it, And her perspective was that she didn't want to see a rerun, really, of the way in which her and the community were portrayed by the media after Rob died. The way that, she said, the analogy she used, well, the story that she told was that when the TV crews came around the neighborhood, they didn't really engage with the community in a way that was what they chose to do, in a way that she felt was respectful. What they chose to do was film like the garbage on the street, just to film to try to already frame this family and this community and this place in a very specific context. Which is then impossible to break, a very dehumanizing context, which then allows people to dismiss what happened to Rob and not take on its relevance, its wider relevance and context. So she was immediately like, that's the problem. That was the problem for me. I don't want to see that. And, and I was like, well, that's not what we're going to do,
It's truly, it's reverential. It is, as it says in the end title card, it's in loving memory of this beautiful young man whose life was cut short. I mean, that's, of course, if you look up more about the book and more about the tragedy that happened here, that is the reminder, is that his life was short.
Yeah.
And we only have, whatever time we have to make impact on people. And that is also, of course, what A Real Pain is exploring as well, is the people who've made impact on us, framing this through that lens of going to and grappling with the grief over the loss of an important figure in someone's life, like a grandparent. Tell me a little bit about the importance for both of you, too, of being in the places. So, Jesse, of course, you went and shot everything in Poland, and, of course, going to Yale and going and shooting in New Jersey as well.
Yeah, I mean, I started traveling when I met my wife, who and she dragged me all over the world, backpacking reluctantly through countries that I'd never heard of, and so I would always complain while we're there, and I would always just worry I'm going to get sick the whole time, and try to get 8 hours of sleep, and then climb the mountain for the few hours, and then go back and worry again, and then. So we went to Poland together like 15 years ago. The movie's actually based on not my grandmother, but my Aunt Doris. I call her Grandma Dory in the movie for, I didn't really want to make it about my real aunt, but it's the exact descriptions of her is her, and she lives in this house. And I told my aunt, if I ever get a job in Europe, we'll go to Poland to see the little house you grew up in. And when I went there, it was funny because I thought. Well, first, it was interesting. I went to this little town, and I thought because I guess I'm a huge narcissist, I just assumed, everybody's going to look like me, And so we were walking around this little town, and no one looked like me. And then I realized, oh, right, they were killed, they were left, they were killed, they escaped, whatever. And I was like, oh, my God. And that was, the existential moment of, oh, right, there's something, missing here, Went to the house, saw the corner store that they lived above. They sold dry goods to Poles, and Poles had great relationship with Polish people, counter to a lot of stories you might hear. Great relationship with the local Poles. And that's when I had that kind of epiphany. Oh, there's something missing here. And the thing missing was I forgot the exact number of million Jews who, Polish Jews, but it was astronomical, 2/3 of the Jewish population worldwide. So that's what I started thinking about. And then I started thinking about, God, what if they didn't leave? What if the war didn't happen? I would live here. This is so crazy. I would, would I be selling these things? And would I worry about my sleep? Maybe not, maybe I could have it all. And, so that was where I started thinking. And so when you ask about place, that was it. It was that. And then just, sorry, if you don't mind me adding one funny kind of little thing, which is we're shooting in all these places. We're shooting at as I mentioned, these kind of very tough locations. And I constantly had the thought, this is the day it's going to break me. I'm just going to have a break. I'm not going to be able to do today's scene. I thought this kind of thing, because it's so emotionally impactful and relevant and resonant to my family. And then it's just so weird what happens, which is just a real lesson in film for me, which is that anything becomes a film set. You turn anything into a film set, and it's a film set. So we're filming at my, family's house, and we're standing outside this door, and we're talking about them. And I have this beautiful actor, Kieran Culkin, telling a beautiful story that happened to me, and he's doing it better than I would have done it. And then the only thing I'm worried about is I knew it was going to rain at 5:30 that day, and I knew the mayor wanted to meet me at lunch, and so that means I had to go eat a lunch to thank the mayor for letting us shoot there, which means we're probably going to finish at 6. And so so that's what you're thinking about all day, and it's just fascinating to me that everything when it's in a movie is a movie.
I think that exactly is something everyone is very curious about, is kind of that all-encompassing nature of being a writer, director, producer, and both of you, of course, starring in the films as well. What have you learned about navigating when you have that brain that's telling you, okay, we've got to get this done, we're going to get done at 6, but I also have to be present in this scene at the same time. But I also want to make sure the shot is the way that we storyboarded it. How do you do it all?
Yeah, you kind of have to give yourself a break, with some of the stuff.
Oh.
It's
Breaking news.
It could drive you nuts, because there's too much. There's too much to do, and one thing I think is that as an actor, you kind of want to it's like the polar opposite part of your mind is working as an actor. Exactly. So it's like you want to take your time as an actor. You want to get there. You want to feel your way into the scene. You know, you want to take as many takes as you need to kind of nail it. You know, and the director is like, we got to get out of here because we're like, you know, we're losing the day, and you know, there's not, you know, so you've got to be able to. I felt like there was times when I just thought I just need to make sure that I can, if I want to do more. If I want to take another take and do what, I have to turn off the other side of me that's kind of in the kind of function of making this film and try to sit within this character, to sit within Ski and do service to myself as an actor and take that time for me, you know. And that's also just about the people that you collaborate with, you know, and how they just sort of help you through and to navigate that and to allow those things to happen. You know.
When I was watching the film, I was thinking of, you know, there's one very, very big emotional scene towards the end of the film, and all I could think about was that idea is like, okay, Chiwetel has to go to this very deep, like, breaking point, but also what is Chiwetel, the director, thinking about that moment? How many takes do you do of this? How many takes as an actor can you push yourself there for, if, you know, whatever, we had a lighting issue or something like that? What was that day like on set, I guess, without spoiling too much? What was that day like on set?
Yeah, I mean, look, Ksenia's here. Ksenia Sarita is our cinematographer, and you know, and I absolutely credit Ksenia's work on this. You know, it's just so highly, and support. You know, in moments like that, where you know, there are times when you've pushed as much as you can. You know, where you feel like I just, you know. And there would be a temptation, I think, you know, for a cinematographer to be like, well, listen, I think he's done, but not Ksenia. Ksenia would be like, listen, I think we can just go in a little tighter and get this from here, and what do you think? And you're like exhausted, you know, wiped out, and like, yeah, let's do that. Let's try. Let's just dig that a little bit deeper. Thank you for that, you know. And you know, and then you're watching it in the, you know, when you're editing the film, and you're so grateful to that kind of collaboration. You're so grateful for people who are supporting you and pushing you and trying to get absolutely everything out of that experience and the love for the story. So, you know, I mean, so much of the team is here, you know, and just amazing people, you know, so thank you for that.
That really is the thing about filmmaking. I always like to say it's like the ultimate team sport, because it takes every single person involved to make something happen that, you know, is just the thing that we all love the most. So I'm curious about also developing those teams as well, and finding those collaborators and finding the people that, you know, see the stories the same way as you do. What did that process look like for both of you on these films?
So my producers are, it's Emma Stone's company, and it's her and her husband, Dave McCary, and their partner, Ali Herding, and of course, Ryan, who's over here at Topic Studios. On set for me every day, Em and Dave and Ryan were there for a few days, and Em obviously is incredibly helpful, you know, and tells me to stop making that same face. And then, But my real right-hand person is Ali Herding. She watched every take. I barely watched footage of the movie. I just said, Ali, did I look ugly? And then she said no. And then I said, move on. She is like a hive brain, you know, she's great. My cinematographer is an absolute genius. I couldn't have worked 2 seconds without him, Michał Dimik. You probably know him from EO last year, or Sweat, which I like even more. And I mean, they're both amazing movies. Sweat happens to be one of my favorites. He is brilliant. He did reveal to me, like, halfway through the shoot, I was like, so wait, was it funny? And he was like, well, to tell you the truth, I don't really understand all of the humor here. And I was like, but I keep asking you, is it funny? And you're like, yes. And so, you know, he's a genius in his way. You know, the American idioms and my speed and Kieran's speed of talking, you know, is not like, you know, what he's exactly been working with. So, you know, he's works on these amazing international and Polish movies and some English movies too. But but you know, I would just rely on them to the point where, you know, and you know, Chiwetel was just talking about, can I get another take? And like for me, it was always like, I can either look at the monitor and watch the scene back, or I can do another take. and I know that the scene's gonna look good because we have this genius cinematographer, and I know Ali said it looks fine, and I saw the other actors doing a good job, so I'm gonna just do one more take, and not look. Yeah.
This film also, not just, of course, was shot in Poland, but the crew is very much, I mean, all throughout. And then, of course, you made the choice with the score to use Chopin as well. Yeah. So tell me about the importance also of that, of crewing a film like this and doing that so, I guess, authentically might be the word?
Mm-hmm. So Ali, who I just talked about, she worked at A24 for a decade, and so she was involved, I think, in very early stages of Zone of Interest, and so we called their producers, which is called Extreme Emotions, Eva Pachinska, one of the great European producers of all time, and they agreed to take on our movie, and so in like the first 15 minutes of speaking to Eva, I realized that like we would have some of the best crew in the entire world. There's a film school in Poland called the Łódź Film School, LODZ, and people from all over the world go to Poland, study Polish for a year to go to that school. So you have people from Denmark, from UK, from very rich countries, would have great film programs or whatever, going to this college town in Poland, learning Polish so they can go to this film school. So we had access to like the best artisans in the world. And so in terms of, you think, oh, I'm making a movie without my usual American cinematographer team, et cetera, it turns out, not only did we not miss a beat, we had just access to the greatest people in the world.
I want to go back real quick to something you were just mentioning about the speed with which you and Kieran both talk. What is so interesting about this, and you've talked about this, of course, in interviews, is that, I mean, y'all don't have a long history of friendship, or, how did it work out so beautifully to have the two of y'all in these characters?
Pure luck. I mean, I watch very little. My wife and my sister were very intimately aware of Kieran's work through different reasons. My sister loves Succession. My wife is a huge Kenneth Lonergan fan, saw all the plays that Kieran was in. And so 20 pages into the script, I gave them, the script, this is what I'm working on now. And they both said, you have to get Kieran for this. And Kieran, and it clicked for me too. I could see, you have a certain instinct about actors when you watch an actor. Oh, this person seems like working in the same world as me, And so I just had this instinct for him, and he is so mercurial, so hard to pin down, so unpredictable, that it was so hard to get him to commit. He really is a homebody, and he is an amazing dad and husband, and he wants to be with his family. He's loath to work, especially in another country, where he leaves his kids. And so I didn't know this, but 2 weeks before we were supposed to shoot, after, maybe $1 million had been spent already, he was trying to drop out of the movie. While we were there, I didn't know if he would, he was always on time. He's the most professional person you could meet, but he's the most unpredictable person. And so I was telling them backstage, he would say in the morning time, hey, what scene are we doing today? And I would say, the scene on the train where you have 5 minutes, you have a 5-minute monologue. And he would say, oh yeah, I love that scene. That's a good scene. And so I would say, do you have the script? Can we get you the script? And he was like, yeah, I think somebody left it in the other room for me. And I was like, just take all of ours, take ours. And he'd look at the thing, and he'd look at it once, and he was like, oh yeah, okay, I'm okay. And I was like, do you want to talk about anything? He's like, no, don't talk to me about this at all. Do not talk to me. I was like, okay. He put the thing in his pocket, and he would be perfect. It's like some sort of genius.
And it comes through. I mean, watching it, you go, David and Benji had to be the two of you. It's just, when you were writing it, obviously you said 20 pages in, you kind of get this idea that it could be him. But you can't also know it's going to work out so perfectly. Was there a moment for you when the two of you are opposite each other where you say, oh wow, it is the thing that I dreamed?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I wanted to play that part. So even after I thought he'd be great in it, I still wanted to play the part because it's the better part. And so...
but David wanted to be him too, so
yes,
that's perfect.
There was some Freudian thing happening. But yeah, and I've done that part before in a play, and I did the play in the West End. I did it 200 times. I could do it well. It's not probably what people would immediately think of me, so that's maybe why I don't...
It's okay, you can let it go.
Thank you so much. And I just feel like it's so hard, and I could do it. Let me just do real quick now. You guys like it? No, but No, but then when I was talking to, Em and Dave and Ali, producers, they were like, "This is going to be such a hard thing for you to do. Don't do that." And that was at a time I didn't know if we could get Kieran anyway. But once I knew we could get him, it was so obvious that there could be nobody better, including me, nobody better. And no, but the moment it clicked was I met him he decided to come to Poland one day before we started shooting, and which is what you want for your star. And on the last flight. And so the meet and greet for our cast was this scene. I don't know if you've seen the movie. There's a kind of little comic set piece scene where we all jump on this monument and take pictures on this old monument. And it's this big scene. And Kieran came an hour late to the rehearsal from the airport. Everybody had been standing around there talking about this mythological creature, Kieran Culkin. And he came in and he started improvising in the character on the thing, and I just looked at Ali, and we're just like, this is it. We knew the movie was going to be good. It's it's so weird. There's always one part. What is this movie going to rely on? And movies rely on 10,000 things, but sometimes really also just one being great, and that was it.
What was that moment for you, Chiwetel, realizing that this movie is really going to happen, this movie is really going to be what I dreamed it would be?
Well, I think it's probably the casting process, and obviously the film relies so heavily on Jay Will, and so finding somebody who's going to play Rob and tell this story, and he was part of the kind of he came out of Juilliard in the kind of COVID year, so he didn't have a full showcase and stuff. He'd done a TV show and. So a lot of the stuff that I saw of him was online of him doing other pieces from different films and so on, and then when we spoke to him about it, and then him starting to play this part, to start to do scenes of Rob, and immediately he really made sense of it. He made sense of the film, and I think he made it a whole. Rob exists in so many different places, but he is consistent. You kind of, it's not code switching. He exists authentically as himself, but unbelievably in all of these spaces, and that's what's really important about him. That he is very genuine and complex, and Jay, was just able to do that. He was just able to move into that space so sort of effortlessly, with such charm and charisma and ease, but but completely sort of dedicated. And I knew that at that point that there was something here. There was something to kind of there was something that was going to bring these different aspects of the film together, and also somebody who was going to take us through the film that we wanted to be in the company of, that we really wanted to enjoy. So I think for me that was the moment. It was really Jay Will.
I love that you mentioned that he wasn't code switching through life, because you notice in the film, obviously he changes his name, the name he goes by, because of the situation that he's in with the connotations around what happens with his father, who we'll talk about Skeet in just a second, but that he changed his name, but he doesn't change anything else about him as he transitions to go into Yale, and he still has his do-rag on in the laboratory.
Yeah.
Why was that an important element to underline in this film?
It's in a way, it's the film. It's the critical moment. Him wearing the do-rag in the lab is the critical moment for me in the story. It tells the story of somebody who's deeply proud of who they are, and is aware that this space is trying to suggest that they shouldn't be that proud, but they are. And they are not in defiance. They are proud because that is all they know how to be about themselves, And I think that is, and it can't be shaken and it can't be sort of beaten out of him. And that is, to me, and in understanding Rob's own journey, that to me was a very deeply profound and beautiful part of him. That a world that wants you to see yourself as inadequate, as less than, and the not even a decision, the reflex, the instinct to not choose that is deeply powerful. And to me, it was the thing that made me fall in love, I think, with Rob as a person, as I was understanding this character, and then understanding him as a character, and then as I was as Jay was interpreting it, it was the moment in the story that leapt out for me, that he was, and then Jay as a performer was able to sit in that with ease as well, was able to understand those dynamics. They're complex dynamics, but if you get them, you get them,
What leapt out to you about Skeet? Because I did also read something along the lines of, if you cast another actor in that part, then you would be directing them to play it as you probably would have played it anyway.
Yeah, and they would know that as well. That they would be like, "Oh, you want me to do it like that? Why don't you come over here and do it like that?"
I guess you keep giving them your films. Just watch this tonight.
Exactly. That it would become very clear very quickly that that I'd acted out the scenes. So it was I felt like there was something. Skeet's a fascinating character. He's a fascinating character and a very rich character and mercurial in that way, and holds this balance and this sway in the story that's attractive as an actor. And obviously, you want to write parts that you want people to kind of gravitate towards, and that definitely did that for me. I felt like when I was switching into those different sides of my head, I was like, this is and in narrative terms, you kind of also. You want to know why Rob is so intrigued and charmed by his father and so sort of taken along by his father. And then also there's all these complexities for his father. And does his father have the right to do all of these things, whatever the weather, whatever his circumstances, whatever his interactions with the criminal justice system, whatever happened, and how does he feel about putting his son in that position and that sense of responsibility and that kind of weight? And these dynamics, I think, are fascinating, and so just create it for me. It was a rich part, and I, it didn't take much arm twisting, for me to what to do.
Yeah, it's nice when your lead actor is like, oh, okay, fine, I would love to be in this film. Yeah. Well, we're kind of blessed to be here with both of you in this moment in your careers. These are both your sophomore features. So I have to ask. Are you ready? Do you know what's next? What will be you're barely breathing in Sundance at this point. It's all just busy and focusing on these two films. But yeah, do you know what's next yet?
Yeah, I'm ready to do my movie this year. Hopefully, I finished it just in time for Sundance in case Sundance went terribly. So I got my producers to agree to do it before anything came out about this movie, which is the exact thing I did on my last movie for this movie. You can tell I live on a kind of fear-based system. And I love doing it. I love doing it because I want to get better, and I think I'm getting better. Like, it's not so much like, I want to be in that seat again. No, it's like I feel like, oh yeah, I'm like kind of like challenged by it again. I've acted in so many things, and I love to, and would want to continue, and will continue, of course. But like, I feel like, oh, this is like kind of a world in which I feel I can improve, and there's nothing better than feeling that.
So great, yeah. That's smart, I didn't do it that way. So
because you're not miserable.
But I totally agree that it's about improving and about kind of getting better and about finding this a real love within the form, and what stories can do, and that's what the journey is for me, to continue.
That means I just have to wait to break the news of the third one later. It's fine. We'll get to it. Well, thank you all so much for joining us, but really just another round of applause for Jesse Eisenberg and Chiwetel. Congratulations, you two.
Thank you for doing this. Thanks.